All right, guys, we're going to show you a partner lat release. This is both lat but also subscap. So super important when it comes to reducing some of that passive lat tone and regaining some of that overhead shoulder flexion. So a lot of times what you'll see if guys are limited overhead and you get them on their back and try to let the arms drop to the table, there's going to be some sort of compensation. Either they can't get the arm to the table or they can get it to the table, but only with the thoracic spine massively compensating to get there. So again, lat is a primary shoulder extensor and an adductor. So if that gets really toned up, which is super common in throwers, again, that's going to be a muscle we really want to work to address to regain some of that overhead shoulder flexion and also adjust some of those scapular mechanics. So as the lat gets tight, it can start to yank the scapula down into depression, into downward rotation, and start to affect the athlete's ability to actually get that scapula to rotate up and get overhead safely. So what we're going to need, a massage table and a little bit of lotion of some sort. You don't need much to do this, but it's useful just to not grab their skin at all as you're going through this movement. So two main releases here. The first one is just kind of a grabbing maneuver, similar to the assessment that we did, the pec or the lat squeeze test. So we're going to basically divide the lat up into three sections. Basically lower lat down here, middle lat kind of right in the middle meat, and upper lat where it gets close to attaching to the humerus. So kind of divide it into sections, and we're going to work through this first release in each of those three segments. So as we're going through this, we're going to use whatever the athlete's feedback is. We're going to use that as kind of a gauge. So he might not be very sensitive lower lat, he might be super sensitive mid lat, might not be very sensitive in the upper lat. So wherever he's the most sensitive, we're going to place the most emphasis and try to stay on that section the longest until that sensitivity dies down. So we're using sensitivity as a gauge, and we're trying to stay on that particular segment and with that particular technique until the sensitivity starts to die down. So we're going to start lower lat, okay, and we're going to take him through shoulder flexion. So I'm grabbing it with my thumb and four fingers, and I'm squeezing about as hard as I can. It's going to vary depending on who you've got, what their grip strength is, but pretty much about as much force as you can put through that. You obviously can see he's not super comfortable there. So I'm shortening the tissue, and now I'm going to take him through a lengthening range of motion. So I'm just going to guide him through overhead shoulder flexion while pinning that tissue with the squeeze technique. So he might give me a gauge of the sensitivity. What's that?
It's probably a 4 out of 10.
So he's about a 4 out of 10 right now, so not too bad. Probably not going to spend a ton of time here, but you're going to want to get to the point where to inactivate a point to where you don't really need to focus on it every week. You're going to want it to be, a 1 or 2 out of 10.
It's probably like a 2 out of 10.
It's not super sensitive. So it's already down to a 2 out of 10. The other maneuver you can do, you can take them through abduction and adduction. So you don't have to just go through overhead shoulder flexion. We can take them up and around like a jumping jack. So he's pretty good on that spot already. That wasn't much of an issue. I'm already feeling mid-lat. There's a little bit more gristle in there. I can really kind of feel that ball of dense tissue. So I'm going to pin and squeeze that particular part. So what's that?
That's probably like an 8.
So that's an 8 out of 10. That's a pretty bad point for him. He just did pull-ups the other day, so he's particularly tender. So again, I'm pinning it, and I'm going to take him through overhead shoulder flexion. And we're just going to work through that until that sensitivity dies down, to a 2, 3, 4 out of 10. Take him through flexion, adduction, abduction. So just simple active release techniques. For the sake of the video, we're going to go through a little quicker. So you'll go mid-lat, and then you'll go a little bit higher, kind of towards that ball of the lat at the very upper part. We'll go through that, same thing, maybe 10 or 20 each direction, or until the sensitivity dies down. So that's part 1 of the release. The second part, we're still going to be working lat. We're also going to be getting subscap as well. So primary internal rotator of the shoulder, and that's going to be on kind of the anterior surface of the scapula. So one of your 4 rotator cuff muscles, but primarily involved in internal rotation of the shoulder, and also a humeral stabilizer during internal rotation into ball release. So what we're going to do is take the heel of our hand. We're still going to divide the lat up into 3 sections. So we're going to start lower lat, and we're really trying to get in this groove on the anterior side of the scap. So we're going to take the heel of our hand, start on the lower lat and subscap, and we're going to cross the arm across the body, so elbow roughly in line with the nipple line, just so that you can really kind of get into the meat of the scap. You kind of fall off it if the arm's on the side. This kind of puts this abducts the scapula, so you have a little bit more room to play with here. And from here, we're going to hold this position and bring him to shoulder flexion. So I'm not yanking him down, I'm kind of guiding him into shoulder flexion. And this is one where if you put too much lotion on, you're going to slide off. So you just want enough so that you're not pinching the skin, or if they've got, you know, armpit hair, you're not pinching that. So just enough. Drive him into shoulder flexion. Use his feedback if you're going too hard. You can also have him actively do it himself, and you kind of just be a guide for the elbow so that he doesn't fall out to the side while he's actively pulling himself into shoulder flexion. So what's that out of 10?
It's probably like a 6 or a 7.
So that's a 6 or 7, so he's not in great shape here. So again, lower lat, we'll go middle. Middle, you can get a nice big piece of the scap. A little bit easier to get under there.
Not as bad.
And then you'd go upper. So those are the two main ways that you can target lat and subscap. But again, this is super, super undervalued when it comes to reducing passive lat tone and restoring overhead shoulder flexion. Obviously, we have other correctives in play here that you'll be doing after this, but first step is reducing that passive tone so that we can now go into things like back to wall shoulder flexion, static lat stretches, things like that, where we can try to solidify some of these gains in reduction in passive lat tone. So this is a good first step. This is one that you're going to really want to find a best friend or a teammate who can do this on you. Not super complicated, but this is one that's going to really pay off. You can stay consistent with this, and once you've successfully reduced that tone over time, this isn't one that you're going to have to do all the time. You're going to get to the point where maybe once a month is plenty once you've you know, made a good dent in the tissue quality over the first month or two. So give this one a try and let us know how it goes.